Good morning. This is Talking Animals on WMNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. My guest today is author and journalist Joshua Hammer, who's written a captivating piece entitled Pablo Escobar's Abandoned Hippos Are Wreaking Havoc in the Colombian Jungle, published in the current issue of Smithsonian magazine and available to read online. A former Newsweek bureau chief in Africa and the Middle East, now a regular contributor to the New York Review of Books, The Atlantic, New York Times, as well as Smithsonian. Hammer definitely explores a situation many of us have heard about. The drug lord Escobar brought hippos into his private zoo, and the far less known aftermath, namely that with mating unchecked, these animals have experienced a population surge, taking up residence at various locations in and around the Magdalena River, the longest in Colombia. These hippos are living quite far from their normal stomping grounds in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's believed they kill about 500 people a year. Here's an invasive species that is particularly deadly. Or is it? One of the things Hammer and I discuss in our conversation recorded Monday night is his ambivalence about just how dangerous the Colombia hippos are, in fact. Either way, the estimated count of hippos presently in Colombia is problematic, and the projected number over fewer than 20 years hence even more so. We'll discuss that thorny issue as well as some of the instances later in the Smithsonian piece where Hammer illustrates the Colombian efforts to sterilize hippos in the wild, a complex and risky endeavor for both humans and hippos. And there's a great deal more to his extraordinary article, marked by reporting that runs notably deep and wide and storytelling that's often gripping. I'll play back that interview with Joshua Hammer in just a moment here on Talking Animals on WMNF. Meanwhile, coming up later in today's program, I'll talk with Alexis Sawyer, Public Services Librarian at St. Pete Beach Public Library, about an hour-long program, Herpetology 101, the library is hosting, presented by Tampa Bay Watch Discovery Center on Tuesday, July 23rd at 1 p.m. This will involve an overview of reptiles and amphibians with an emphasis on those critters typically found in Florida. We'll hear those details about this program, free to attend, by the way, when Alexis Sawyer joins us a bit later in the show. Right now, though, let's hear the conversation I recorded Monday evening with journalist Joshua Hammer about his piece headlined Pablo Escobar's Abandoned Hippos Are Wreaking Havoc in the Colombian Jungle, published in the current issue of Smithsonian magazine. Here it is. All right, let's welcome to Talking Animals, Josh Hammer. Thanks for joining us on the show, Josh.
You're welcome, Duncan.
So, in recent years, I'd see brief items about Escobar's hippos, but usually more like a blurb or a quick take, noting there was this kind of odd circumstance. So I'm wondering, when you first became aware of this hippo situation and this, how you started to think there's an actually big, in-depth story here if I choose to tell it.
Yeah, I'm like you. I think over the years I've picked up bits and pieces of the story, usually just short magazine articles announcing some new development, some new effort on the part of Colombian authorities to deal with the problem. Over time, I mean, I think there was a flurry of them in the last few months or late last year when they actually started a new program. And I just realized that it's got to be a weird scene. Let me just go down and spend like a week there and see what's going on and try to put a little meat on the bones, as it were. So there hadn't been nobody really done that. I mean, there've been a couple of Colombian or certainly one in Colombia, I think, and just Latin American broadcasts about this, radio shows, podcasts, etc. But nobody really done this in the English language.
So having seen those little short things, how did it speak to you to just say, hey, I'm going to go down there, I'm going to see if there's actually a bigger story, because I think there is? Or what prompted you to say, just there's been these little blurbs, and now I'm going to take on
I don't know. I just talked to my editor when I was in Washington, and we just started chatting about it and talking about this new physical castration thing that people just sort of like described in a couple of sentences. But that struck me as, I mean, how weird is this going to be? Like these trapping hippos and drugging them and then castrating them in the bush. I mean, this has got to be something here that was certainly worthy of magazine-length description. So that was enough to sell the magazine on my going to Colombia.
And so with that conversation with your editor, like, what was the thought that the piece would be at that point?
Well, first of all, we'd look at this kind of growing issue of invasive species species, which, I mean, the Smithsonian had run a piece by the great New Yorker writer Ian Fraser a few years ago about the pythons of your neck of the woods.
Yeah, exactly.
The Everglades. And it was very funny, very long story. And I said, we could try to do something on the same level, just kind of get deep into the weeds or whatever we're going, whatever foliage we encounter, and try to do the same thing. And maybe we'll, illuminate the whole bizarre history. How did this happen? What does it say about Colombia, where Colombia stands today? How do you deal with a seemingly intractable problem like this? And also, people are pretty interested in hippos to begin with. The whole idea of hippos. I mean, most of these invasive species articles are about, snakes or snail. Right. But the idea of this, one of the world's largest mammals being an invasive species in a whole other part of the country, of the world, is just irresistible.
Did you come to this partly as an animal guy of some kind, or this was strictly like a journalistic enterprise that you thought, hey, this could be something really interesting if I get down there and check it out?
My last book was about animals. I mean, it's not particularly. I just like a good yarn, but my last book was about a guy who became obsessed with falcons and stealing the rare eggs of the eggs of rare falcons, going into very remote parts of the world and marketing them to the in the Middle East. So I'd written a whole book about the animal world. I've spoken to biologists. I'm familiar with this world. It's something I do exclusively, but I felt comfortable with it because I know the science. I know the milieu, as it were. Yeah,
for sure. So one has to be kind of a certain advantage to be familiar with Pablo Escobar. Sadly, I'm plenty old enough to know who he is. Yeah. But for those who might be unfamiliar with Escobar, maybe you could just give us a brief overview of him and kind of.
Yeah, Escobar grew up in a working class family. I believe his mother was a teacher in a working class neighborhood of Medellin, which is one of the main cities of Colombia. Got into a life of crime pretty early, doing things like stealing tombstones. This is the one I was always most interested in, stealing tombstones and sanding off the names and then reselling them. Apparently I don't mean stealing them from tombstone shop, from skulls, from carvers. I mean going into cemeteries.
Wow.
And ripping them off there. So
that's some serious recycling there.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing led to another, and he got into the cocaine, the business of transporting coca paste from the origin countries, which at that time I believe were Ecuador and Bolivia. Those are the main producers. And Escobar actually began bringing it in. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, I have to admit, if he did the lab work of actually taking the coca and turning it into coca powder. But certainly he cornered the market. He began to fly small planes into the United States and cornered the market on selling cocaine in the 70s to a huge affluent consumer population, and that it took off from there. For the first 2 years he was just suddenly emerged in this Colombia as a wealthy businessman. And then by the mid 80s, he was well identified as one of the major narco traffickers of Latin America. And that's when the police really began to go after him big time. And he became a man on the run.
And pretty affluent himself along the way.
And what? Sorry?
And pretty affluent himself.
Yeah, well, I think he was worth several $1 billion in the 1980s. That was what his wealth was valued at. Another number put at it. Yeah. And, surrounded himself with all these accoutrements of the ultimate narco trafficker. I mean, including this giant hacienda ranch that he purchased out in the area that I spent about a week, near the Magdalena River in northern Colombia, which flows into the Caribbean Sea. It's kind of fairly sparsely populated, jungly, very tropical, and he purchased a huge plot of land there and began to develop it as his hacienda, as his escape, place to escape, and was there from like the mid 70s until the early 80s when he had to flee and go underground.
Now, jugglers tend to buy certain things, including haciendas, with their wealth and boats and cars and whatever. But he bought eventually where this is going. Obviously, is he bought a bunch of exotic animals and said, "I'm going to create my own zoo." And
Yeah.
can you describe a little bit about his critter shopping and sort of what drove it?
So nobody really knows what drove it, but I mean, it's not. He wasn't the first of these big narco traffickers to have a menagerie. It's this something about you know
Keeping up
these
with the Joneses?
well, yeah, that's certainly part of it, no doubt.
Yeah,
But sort of like exoticism and power and being able to control these savage beasts. I mean, you can only speculate psychologically about what was
yeah,
going on, but it clearly was, this great material possession. The other thing was that he began to purchase these animals. Um, and he invited the public. He created a safari park for the local population, which followed up on his creation of these sponsoring of these soccer leagues. So he was out to establish himself as a heroic figure among the population of Colombia. To become popular, spread the money around,
yeah.
shit on the people. For the ends, who knows? Probably to provide him with a level of protection. Um, but it was quite effective there. I mean, they really people would line up and visit the menagerie, and they'd be shuttled around in these electric vehicles, and like being on it. He had styled the place like the African savannah, so he almost had an African experience in the bush of the jungle of Latin America. Yeah, and that
You were
continued
part zoo,
until
part theme park,
what?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Talking Animals on WNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. My guest is Joshua Hammer, an author and journalist who's written a fascinating piece in the current Smithsonian magazine exploring the complicated aftermath of the hippos that drug lord Pablo Escobar brought into Colombia. These dangerous animals have been breeding like crazy, and the ensuing problems have been similarly multiplying. This interview was recorded Monday. So I learned a lot about hippos from your piece, including that it turns out they're prolific breeders, which I don't think would be necessarily expected or commonly known. Help us understand just how prolific.
Think once they reach maturity, which is like fertility, which is like the age of 7, I think, for female hippo, they can produce up to a hippo every year and a half, and their lifespans are 40 to 50 years. So they can produce, 30 to 40 baby hippos in the course of a lifetime, which is part of why Colombia is in the fix that it's in right now.
Yeah, that's kind of the very problem that you were sort of spotlighting in your Smithsonian piece, really. So let's run, I guess, a few numbers based on the numbers you just mentioned. Because it sounded like the initial number of hippos Escobar brought in was like 4, give or take. Sound like the
4. Four
yeah.
is the general number you hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a narco trafficker. I mean, so nobody really, everything's a bit obscure about what
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. I can't quite recall that with clarity. Yeah.
But 4 is the number generally that you hear.
Yeah.
3 females and a male.
Right. And then last year, I guess the government count put the population number at around 169.
Yes.
I think another expert you spoke to said that might be closer to 200 at this point. But the
Right.
staggering number is what the biologists project what the tally will be come 2040 if the breeding is unchecked, which I guess is like 1,400. That's a lot of hippos.
Give or take.
A lot of hippos.
That's a lot of hippos.
Yeah.
It's not an African number, but it's, for an invasive species that doesn't belong there, it's pretty significant.
Well, that's the thing. We already talked a little bit about invasive species, and again, I'm in South Florida, so yeah, we have the Burmese python most famously, but we've got others too. But this seems like ultra invasive and super dangerous as invasive species go.
Are they?
That's the thing. There's parts of your piece where I thought it sounded like they're dangerous, and parts of this piece where it sounded like you were thinking, are they really that dangerous when it comes down to it?
I think I came away with that ambiguity, and having talked to a couple of hippo experts, that feeling, it turns out, is shared, that like hippos have gotten a bad rap. That they're actually not as dangerous as I guess openly aggressive as other animals are, as say Cape buffaloes or elephants. But I think, and there haven't been any fatalities all this time. Not a single
in Colombia
has been killed by a hippo. There's been a couple of minor, I guess one sort of serious injury, a confrontation between a farmer and a hippo.
Yeah.
As far as I could tell, that was the only case. So that does raise the question of, are they really as aggressive and dangerous as people say? Now, in Africa's got a different dynamic, different populations, large populations of hippos, large populations of humans living very close to each other, coming into regular contact, river fishermen, river populations. So, and these, there have been, I think the number that seems to be agreed on is that there are 500 killings a year of humans by hippos in Africa.
And
So that's a pretty scary number.
Yeah, and that's so strikingly different, you're suggesting, because the population, both hippos and the human population, and the proximity between them both is such
They're
that
right up against each other.
They're just
Yes.
asking for
And you don't get that really. You don't get that really. I mean, the hippos are fairly well spread out at the moment.
Yeah.
It's a large area. They range, 50, 60 miles in every direction from Escobar's hacienda. So one thing that's worrisome to people, though, is that they have migrated to the main river, the Magdalena River, which runs all the way to the Caribbean, and that could be, somebody a knowledgeable local environmental guy that I talked to, that could be sort of the highway to the apocalypse. If these animals just can use the river to spread, then they could really just take over the Colombian countryside.
Yeah, well, even before we get
at some point have an Africa situation,
Yeah, well, especially if we get up to those big numbers that are projected over the next 15, 20 years or whatever.
Right. So the point is that nobody really knows. Nobody knows how dangerous the hippos are in this situation, because it's an unparalleled situation. There's nothing to compare it to.
Yeah, I got you. Well, so I guess what we do know is the impact of this many hippos is considerable in terms of the flora and fauna already, right? Just kind of the general ecosystem. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what.
Yeah, that's what they're saying, but I don't think there's yet really any definitive proof. But there are competing species like these capybaras, turtles, or threatened species in the area that are in direct conflict. We know that direct conflict with the hippos on the rivers. There's talk of the incredible amount of feces that these animals produce a day.
I was about to say,
that is
another thing
getting into the water supply.
Yeah.
Again, it's just 200 right now, but exponential growth means potential disaster. I mean, the expert hippo biologist that I talked to said that Colombia is in a precarious situation.
And is this kind of considered a tipping point in that way?
Right now, where we are now?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, been hearing tipping point for a long time. I mean,
right.
I don't know. I don't know how to define a tipping point. Like if they don't act now, then it'll go out of control. You're dealing with whatever geometric expansion. So any day is a tipping point.
Yeah. Well, just even on the enormous amount of feces alone, that's going to have its own impact, at least fairly immediate, if not longer.
Right.
And which the water.
You're already getting the more and more direct confrontations between hippos and humans. Not a lot, but some instances of that, and that's what happens on a daily basis in Africa. So this is definitely recorded confrontations, face-offs between animals and humans that you didn't have on a regular basis that you didn't have a few years ago. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Let's look at the future.
So do you feel like it's slowly marching towards the kind of experiences that people do have in Africa?
That's a long way to go. I mean, we're talking tens. I don't know what the hippo population of Africa is. I mean, I've traveled in Zimbabwe on rivers there, where they're like hundreds of hippos. They're everywhere. You have to thread in your canoe past these, herds of hippos. It's crazy. I mean, there's nothing like that, right?
Yeah.
3 or 4 here, 3 or 4 there. One group right next to the hacienda of 50 in a river. I mean, in a big lake. That's kind of the biggest concentration.
Yeah.
And they're like 10 on the whole Magdalena River right now. So that's not a huge number.
Oh, there's only 10 there?
It isn't near Africa levels. No.
Yeah. I don't know why I thought there was more in the Magdalena than 10, just by some of the scenes that you presented.
Yeah, because there was this one group of four right at the meeting place of the tributary we were on the Magdalena. They were for some reason they just haunt that particular spot.
Yeah.
And they're well known. But yeah. And
So,
four in a spot is pretty impressive, you know.
yeah, well, it doesn't take more than one probably to present a problem.
No.
If there's a problem to be had.
You have to just suddenly, slap yourself and say, like, I'm in the middle of rural Colombia here, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of just mind blowing.
Well, since you were it sounds like ended up being a little ambiguous about how dangerous they were, did you feel at points when you were reporting this, like in some kind of jeopardy at all? Or, I mean, there's one scene that you present there in the story where you're riding up the Magdalena in a small boat and
Yeah.
place for some hippos, and the engine stalls.
Yeah, it wasn't very comfortable. That's definitely true. And that went on for about 20 to 30 minutes, just drifting.
Yeah, drifting towards the hippos, I should add.
And you could tell that the driver was he was sweating. The boatman was sweating, you know.
Well, even people reading the account were sweating, if that matters at all. I mean, it's like pretty riveting kind of thing. Like, Jesus, is they going to start the motor? Is it going to start the motor? Or,
miraculously, yes.
Yeah, thank God. But that was like, that was high
crazy.
adrenaline.
That's the only time. That was the only time.
So you never felt in jeopardy otherwise?
No, because we saw a lot of hippos, but we were with experts, and we kept our distance, and they were all happily, floating around in the water, and they weren't threatening.
Yeah, so I guess they just really have to be provoked in some way, or
I don't know what makes them go.
Way.
I think they do. I mean, clearly, when we were on our canoes in Zimbabwe, going on a river, the Zambezi River, flowing right past them, in like 8 canoes, you could see how they might interpret that as a threat.
Yeah,
yeah. And I think that's often what happens. I think the confrontations are between fishermen who depend on those rivers for their livelihoods and hippos who frequent the river. So you have a lot of those confrontations on a daily basis in Africa.
A territorial battle, probably.
Maybe a hippo feels like, its calf is under threat or whatever. But then they do turn aggressive, come up under your boat, bang, and they can kill you. They have big teeth. Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah, I think there's another part where, and they're actually maybe in that same scene where they're displaying their big teeth, and the guide you're with or somebody you're with saying, people find that really cute, but that's a sign of aggression.
Right.
Like, don't be a dope about this,
Right.
Yeah.
That's 1,000, 1,500 pounds of, aggression. If
they get in a bad mood, you don't want to be on the wrong side of that.
No.
Yeah. So just to go back to Escobar a little bit, when he was putting this whole thing together, I know he got, kind of your standard issue elephants and odds and ends. And and where did he get those? I guess it was just from various zoos and other places that he paid off.
There's a lot of debate about this. Some say it was from private breeders in the States. This official that I met in the town hall in the main municipality of the area where Escobar frequented, he said that he actually had seen the records before they were destroyed in a flood, and he claimed that it was all from zoos in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And here's perhaps the $64,000 question: do we know why, in particular, he wanted hippos to be part of this?
He had a thing for animals that were herbivores. He did not want carnivores.
Interesting.
He did not like meat eaters. I think he felt that the management of meat eaters was too difficult and too much meat involved. And also, like, if I think he might have been nervous about exposing this regular, the local population to lions and cheetahs and stuff, it can get out of control. So he stuck exclusively to herbivores, which means...
That's interesting, because I noticed, you pointed that out, but I guess I didn't make the connection, because I thought he just, like a lion or a tiger was too obvious in the drug dealer realm for a kind of animal that a drug...
I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I didn't make the connection.
You would think that he would want the big felines, for sure.
Yeah, but I didn't make the connection that he was trying to steer clear of carnivores. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that was what was, again, this is what the guy, the expert told me in on the Magdalena River. Yeah.
Yeah,
Municipal
that holds
fishing.
up, and
Puerto, I can't remember the name. Puerto Triunfo.
yeah. So again, this is Talking Animals on WNF. I'm Duncan Strauss, and I'm speaking with author and journalist Joshua Hammer, who's written a gripping piece entitled "Pablo Escobar's Abandoned Hippos Are Wreaking Havoc in the Colombian Jungle," published in the current issue of Smithsonian magazine and available online. This interview was recorded Monday. So, as I think we've established, there's an array of problems associated with a single hippo. Now there's veritable population growth. I wouldn't say explosion just yet, but we're on the way to an explosion. So maybe you could describe some of the measures initially that were seeking to control or slow further growth. And then it seems like there was a number of things that were tried after that that maybe we can explore as well.
First thing they tried to do was they tried to cull them, to shoot them. This was back in maybe 20 years ago. And there was one hippo that was killed by a professional hunter engaged by the Colombian government that created huge uproar among the population when the photograph of the kill was posted and printed in the newspapers, local newspapers. So there was actually in the middle of a civil war where people were getting killed left and right. The killing of a single hippo provoked this national protest. The Minister of the Interior or the Environment had to resign. They then decided that there would be no more hippo culling and they'd have to find other solutions, alternatives. So they tried sending hunters into the field to dart the hippos in the wild, but it was an attempt to castrate them. But it was simply they would dart them and then the animals would run off. It would take too long for the tranquilizer to take effect. That didn't work. They tried chemical castration, but that required a series of darts over a few months, and that meant that the hippos had to be monitored, and that wasn't possible. They tried getting other zoos around the world to take them, and nobody wanted them. That didn't work out. They faced protests from environmental groups.
What was the nature of those protests?
I think there's one powerful group of scientists that felt that it was a waste of money. It was so expensive to transport these hippos. That the money should be going to where the real problems are, to conservation in Africa. That's where the real human animal conflict is, and where the animals are more endangered, and that's where the money should be directed. This is kind of just a waste of resources. Yeah. So they haven't succeeded, and plus it's really hard apparently to get to. Hippos are a hard sell, and so nobody wanted them.
Just in terms of caring for them,
caring for them, it's super expensive. It's really expensive to move them. There has water filtration. It involves an awful lot.
Yeah.
To maintain a hippo, it's not just a cage.
Captive.
You need an environment. You need an environment of where they can they're like almost amphibious creatures.
Yeah.
So that hasn't worked out, and it was only late last year that they sort of honed this castration program so that they would actually attempt to trap the animals in these corrals built of indestructible metal so they couldn't get out, and then dart them in captivity, wait outside for them to go unconscious, and then send in the veterinary team to do the work, to do the neutering on the spot. So they dart them, don't allow them to escape. They just get captive, they run around for 45 minutes and then they collapse, sink to their knees, then roll over, and then they move in. They've done it so far, apparently, like maybe by now a dozen times since last fall.
But that's, given the size of the population, I guess that's making a small dent at best.
The number that the lead biologist on the program told me they needed to achieve was 40 in a year, average 40 a year. So they may be, a third of that, or a half, maybe even a half, 40%, if they're lucky.
Yeah.
The population will not stop growing until they hit that 40 a year. That's what they That's what they calculate.
And do they think they'll be able to increase that number just by getting a more refined system?
They don't know, because the hippos are getting wise. It's like the word's getting out.
Yeah. Steer clear of those guys with the needles or whatever.
Don't follow that trail of mangoes.
Yeah.
At your peril.
Yeah. Wow. So what do you think realistically then? What does the future hold here? I mean, is it
probably going to have to start killing them? To start bear the political
Is that
costs.
what
And
they say? I mean,
yeah,
openly, or
that's
is
what you
that
kind
just
of
kind of
hear.
more?
That's what you're
Uh,
hearing. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So I think that's unfortunately for the hippos and for hippo lovers, I believe that'll be not the only solution. They say they want to keep castrating. They want to look at others at the zoo, transporting to international zoos, continue that pressure, and then, begin to cull them as well, because that's the only way that they can succeed in getting the population under control.
yeah, and they head off the that 1400 or whatever that we were looking at.
Yeah, maybe keep it at the level it is now.
Yeah,
Where it's a kind of a threat of an annoyance, a little bit of intimidation here and there, but it hasn't gotten completely out of control.
yeah, and it sounded like too from what the parts of your different parts of your story was that people feel sort of very fond of the hippos, even if they're nervous or uneasy about them. There's like a real interesting sort of affection that they seem to have, even though there's a huge hassle and these things keep growing and they keep pooping everywhere and there are all these things, but nonetheless, people seem to be very favorably inclined generally.
Yeah, it seems like the local population up there really welcomes the hippos. Yeah,
Yeah,
for the moment, they're money makers. People are going up there for tourism now. People are throwing up, making little makeshift hotels on stretches of road where there are hippo crossings, where the hippos can graze at night. It's become, some people got this woman I met on the river has these whole fairly lucrative organized river tours set up to the Magdalena River and back. So some people are finding it, delightful. And then people just they like hippos. I mean, they're kind of, in a way, charming and, charismatic animals.
yeah,
As lumbering and weird looking as they are, there's something, attractive about them, right? People
yeah. They're
can't
kind
get
of
enough of them.
kind of cartoonish in certain way.
Yeah, kind of
Yeah,
cartoonish. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. Comical. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, because it sounds like there was, just like that real strong feeling, and then there was this woman that you sketched the scene of that had this one hippo that's kind of
Yeah.
in the backyard virtually.
Yeah.
And it's like
Right. Just wandered into her pond one day and took
yeah,
up residence. And she's quite content.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't sound like people that are worried about a dangerous hippo.
It hasn't made any trouble. It had been there a few months when I met her, and it didn't bother anybody. The owners of the bed and breakfast, where she was a curator, a custodian of, were from afar. They were quite nervous about this, worried about like guests being trampled or whatever. And
Yeah,
yeah, so they weren't too keen on having this hippo in the back garden.
for sure. Yeah. So how did you end up feeling about hippos when all was said and done and you finished your story? And
I've always kind of liked hippos. I think I felt more favorably inclined to them because my last real serious encounter with hippos was on the Zambezi River like decades ago, which was a scary experience.
mm,
We were hearing from our guides back then about people who had, hippos coming up underneath the canoes and smashing them. And so it was pretty scary, as fascinating as it was to see these ears and, the snouts and these pods of hippos. It was exciting, but very menacing and threatening at the same time. So
yeah,
now I felt a little bit less threatened by them, because I saw people interacting with them and quite enjoying it.
yeah. So that kind of arc, I think it sounds like your earlier experience coupled with what you found on this trip reporting probably led to your sort of ambivalence about
Totally.
are they
Yeah.
dangerous or not dangerous, really.
Yeah. And
I
a
mean,
couple
like
of these wildlife biologists who specialize in hippos who I spoke to were quite adamant that like hippos have gotten a bad rap.
yeah. Well, they
They're
probably
really
know
not
better.
not innately aggressive animals. So
Yeah,
they say.
it sounds like it's kind of situational. Like if you give them some space between the other hippos and especially other humans, they're not going to be aggressive. And if they're crowded with their hippos and humans and other elements, they're
I
going to.
absolutely think that's what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of space there still. There aren't real confrontations. A couple of fishermen felt threatened, a couple of, these people who have to have direct dealings, who inhabit the same space. A couple of
Yeah, it's
couple of
affecting their
That's about
livelihood.
it. That's about it.
Yeah. Okay, so gosh, any final hippo word or anything that we?
No, I think we've exhausted the subject, but I appreciate your interest, and I hope your readers, your listeners, will pick up the mag and
Yeah. Well, no,
read the strange adventure that I had because it still stays with me, really.
no, and it's really it's a great story. It's riveting and it's fascinating. And again, no matter what your level of hippo expertise is, you're definitely going to become much more knowledgeable about hippos when you
Well,
finish up
thank
the
you.
piece. So
Thank you
we've
for
been
your
speaking with
interest.
Joshua Hammer. Thanks so much for joining us today on Talking Animals, and we're all pro hippo here for what it's worth.
Great. Thanks for having me.
My thanks again to Josh Hammer. He actually interrupted his vacation to join me for that conversation. So again, the piece on the Escobar hippos appears in the current issue. That's the July-August issue of Smithsonian Magazine, and you can read it online at smithsonianmag.com. In a moment or two, I'll speak with librarian Alexis Sawyer about an hour-long problem called Herpetology 101, which the St. Pete Beach Library will offer, presented by Tampa Bay Watch Discovery Center on Tuesday, July 23rd. This will likely serve as a solid introduction to reptiles and amphibians for students K through 12. More about Herpetology 101 in a minute or two here on Talking Animals on WNF. Right now, we're going to step into the comedy corner with a piece by John Mulaney. From a period when his family situation was, let's say, dramatically different than he indicates in the midst of this piece. But this is called Baby Grandma from John Mulaney in today's Comedy Corner on Talking Animals on WMNF.
My wife and I don't have any children. We have a dog. We have a little puppy named Petunia. She's a tiny little French bulldog puppy. I like having a puppy that's a bulldog because it's like having a baby that is also a grandma. Her body is young, her face is as old as time. She definitely saw the Nazis march into Paris. She always gives me this look of like, oh, the things I have seen. You have no idea. The Gestapo threw my printing press into a river. But go tell your jokes. Bring me my dish. She said that. Petunia is my best friend in the world. I give her 1 million kisses a day. She does not like me and barks at me and bites me all day long. We had to get a dog trainer into the apartment because Petunia is a bad dog. We tell her that every day. We go, hey, you're bad at being a dog. So the trainer came into the apartment. Didn't even walk into the apartment. Walked into the threshold and went, oh, okay. Like she was an exorcist or something. She said, I see what the problem is. She said, Petunia has become the alpha of the house. And then she pointed at me. She said, you are no longer the alpha of the house. And in the back of my head, I was like, I was never the alpha of the house. I turned to my wife. I was like, let's pretend. It'll be fun. Yes, my title of alpha, which I once had. How could I reclaim it? Because that was a thing that existed at one time. She said, you need to show dominance over your puppy. These are things people say to me. I said, how do I do that? She said, well, let me ask you this. Who eats dinner first, you or Petunia? I was like, Petunia eats dinner first. She eats dinner at 5 p.m. because she's a foot long and 2 years old. She said, no, you need to eat dinner first because the king eats before anyone else eats. Oh, yes. And what a mighty king I will be. Eating dinner at 4:45 in the afternoon. Look upon your sovereign, Petunia, and tremble. My lands stretch across this entire one bedroom, and I eat dinner whenever I choose, as long as it works for the schedule of a dog. She said, no, you don't actually have to eat dinner before Petunia. You just have to convince Petunia that you've already eaten. So, for the past month, before my wife and I give Petunia her dish, we take down empty bowls and spoons, and in front of her we go, dinner. Good dinner. Like we're space aliens in a play about human beings that they wrote but they didn't work that hard on. We're eating dinner. Meanwhile, Petunia's just staring at us with her Paul Giamatti face like... You're not eating dinner. Dish now.
That was John Mulaney in today's Comedy Corner with a piece called Baby Grandma, taken from his album, The Comeback Kid. So we're just a few minutes away still from hearing from Alexis Sawyer about the Herpetology 101 program being offered next Tuesday at the St. Pete Beach Library. We'll get into that conversation in just around the corner, but I do feel compelled to hear a Hippos song, and for that to be properly nutty and respectful of the animal, I think that's kind of a job for Sparks. So here's Hippopotamus from Sparks here on WMNF.
There's a book by anonymous, a book by anonymous, and a hippopotamus in my pool. No, I've not read it, no, I've not read it. When it dries out, I'll have a go. How did it get there? How did it get there? How did it get there? I don't know. Someone must have been fooling around. Someone must have been acting a clown. Someone must have been taking a piss and acting like this. There's a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, by Hieronymus Bosch, by Hieronymus in my pool. There's a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, by Hieronymus Bosch, by Hieronymus in my pool. How did it get there? How did it get there? How did it get there? Sure beats me. Must be a late work, must be a late work. One of his late works, obviously. There's a Volkswagen microbus, a Volkswagen microbus, a Volkswagen microbus in my pool. A 58 microbus, a 58 microbus, a 58 microbus in my pool. A hippie is driving, a hippie is driving, a trippy old hippie, poor guy. A hippie is driving, a hippie is driving. I throw him down here, go get dry. Someone must have been acting real cute. Someone wearing a hippie suit. Someone must have gone over her life, throwing a hippo and then a giraffe. There is Titus Andronicus, Titus Andronicus, Titus Andronicus in my pool. There is Titus Andronicus, Titus Andronicus, wearing a snorkel in my pool. Now he's gone thunder, now he's gone thunder, now he's gone thunder, worry not. Excellent swimmer, looking much trimmer than I thought. There's a woman with an abacus, a woman with an abacus, a woman with an abacus, she looks Chinese. There's a woman with an abacus, a woman with an abacus, a woman with an abacus, she looks Chinese. Not that I'm prejudiced, not that I'm prejudiced, not that I'm prejudiced, no, not me. Not that I'm prejudiced, not that I'm prejudiced, not that I'm prejudiced, that's not me. Throwing a hippo a little Dutch heart, an actor performing a Shakespearean part. Summary book and Germanic fan, Asian lady, isn't it grand? Yes, yes, so grand.
That was Sparks with Hippopotamus from the album of the same name. We got to play a hippopotamus song after a big interview about hippopotamuses, I think, don't you? Okay. So, right now, though, it's time to speak with Alexis Sawyer of St. Pete Beach Library about the Herpetology 101 program. The library is set to host on Tuesday, July 23rd. Here's Alexis Sawyer on Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, Alexa.
Good morning.
Wow, that's...
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. At first, let's hope. Seems like there's kind of a buzz on that line. Jeez. Are you on speaker or anything by any chance, or?
No, just connected to the library landline.
Okay. Well, let's hope it. I'm trying to adjust it here on my end, but I can't. I think it's on the library line, possibly. I mean, I guess we could try again. But
could I give you another number?
Yeah, maybe we should just, because I think this will be a little rough. So I'll call you right back, and so give me that number if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
Okay. You ready for it?
Yes.
727-534-2502.
Okay, I'll call you right back, Alexa, and we'll see if we can get this fixed up. Thank you so much. All right, let's rejoin Alexa in progress. Alexa, hello, back on Talking Animals on WNF. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And here we go. I think this is much cleaner sound, so that's really great. So let's talk a little bit about, of course, just Herpetology 101, which we'll go in a moment more specifically. But I think when people think about libraries, they often, of course, think of books and reading, but they don't necessarily imagine a program at the library where school kids can hear about reptiles and amphibians. So talk a little bit about this program and maybe others, and what effort or to what extent, I guess, they represent the library's attempt to kind of expand what a library experience can be.
Absolutely. So here at St. Pete Beach, part of our mission is to protect beaches and focus on sustainability and building a family-friendly environment. So I really try to make community connections that inspire a lifelong love of learning, and I try to foster a sense of curiosity and exploration. And what better way to do those things than through educational, fun animal programs with organizations involved with rescue and conservation. So we're going to have the Tampa Bay Watch Discovery Center out to do a presentation on Herpetology 101. They'll bring their animal ambassadors to show patrons some of the key characteristics of these creatures, and they'll tell us why they're important and how we can help to protect them.
Well, that sounds great. So, and I guess this is kind of aimed, if I'm not mistaken, at students from kindergarten through K through 12, basically, right? Yes,
it's for children grades K through 12, and there's no registration or library cards needed. It's open to the public, so anybody can come to the St. Pete Beach Library and learn about herpetology. That's great. Now, that's a pretty wide age range. So it's probably with a pretty wide range of attention spans as well. That's kind of a tall task for whoever's giving that presentation. How is that going to be addressed if you get anywhere near that kind of range of folks from all those ages into the program? Yeah, honestly, when they bring animal ambassadors, most of the focus for the kids is on the turtle or the snake or the frog. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, that's what unites those various age groups. Okay. And they, do kind of tailor it to, most programs will tend to get, oh, look, it's mostly preschoolers or it's mostly, older kids. And they're very good at the Discovery Center adapting to, what shows up. So. Well, that's good. Yeah. And so how did the alliance between the Tampa Bay Baywatch Discovery Center come about? So I do all the programs here at the library, and I reached out to them and asked them if they had any educational outreach opportunities for our summer reading program. And so for the last couple of years, they've come out and done a program called Estuary Encounters and then Herpetology 101. So we have quite a few partnerships with different organizations that focus on rescue and rehabilitation of animals and also conservation. So they're just one of our community partners. So can you give us an example of another one or two that's kind of animal-oriented in the same way that Herpetology 101 is? Absolutely. So we have a monthly program presented by Sydney at the Seaside Seabird Sanctuary. They talk about the rescue, rehabilitation, and hopeful release of sick and injured native wild birds. And they come out and they also spread conservation awareness. So that's a monthly program where they also bring animal ambassadors. One of our favorites is Rufus. He's a little eastern screech owl. They also bring Kevin, an American kestrel, and Phantom, a peregrine falcon. So
Wow.
It's a lot of fun. They come out to the library. That next event is Wednesday, August 14th at noon. Again, it's open to the public.
That's so great. Now, these sound like really cool programs, and certainly I don't recall anything like that when I was going to the library at that age. So that sounds really like a great opportunity. And do you find, like, I'm sure they enjoy the animal ambassadors that are on hand there, but do you find there's a further connection between these kind of programs and, like, interest in books or reading about those animals, or like kind of connecting more directly, even the library, to those kinds of experiences?
Oh, absolutely. If we have children show up and they see Rufus, the eastern screech owl, they say, I've never seen an owl that small. Can you show me some more books or resources about those owls? And then we can direct them to the collection or get them online. And, we really just want to spark that curiosity and exploration and build good experiences and good memories at the library, because eventually that'll lead to that lifelong learning.
For sure. No, I think that'll really stimulate all kinds of curiosity and kind of reading maybe more widely than they otherwise would have without these cool programs inspiring them. So that's great.
Yeah, and we also partner with an organization called Sea Turtle Trackers. They focus on sea turtle conservation.
Great.
They come out and do a story time, as well as Save Our Strays. We did a Find Your Furry Valentine adoption and donation event.
Nice.
And then Tampa Bay Bat and the Pet Skunk Advocates and Rescues. So we really appreciate our animal partnerships, and we try to bring attention to those organizations as well.
So would people find out about these when they're happening, like on the St. Pete Beach library website or social media or both? Or what's the best way for people to kind of track some of those? Because they sound like a bunch more cool things coming up.
Yeah, so everything's always posted on our library website, stblibrary.com. And then we also have a Facebook page and an Instagram. And we're always posting about all the fun events we do.
That sounds great. Well, just to review the one we kind of initially came together to talk about, it's Herpetology 101. It's this Tuesday, July 23rd from 1 to 2 p.m. at the St. Pete Beach Library. And again, there's no ticketed event. There's no cost to participate or to show up at this. So that's really great, a great service, I think, to kids and their parents in these summer months. So, Alexa, thank you so much for joining us today on Talking Animals, and thanks for your cool programming.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right, coming up on Talking Animal, on WMNF shortly, we've got the conversation, getting all organized here next door in the other studio. And that's the brand new show, of course, hosted by Mario Nunez and Joaquin Carter. After that, we shift back to music program with Jim Bannon, holding forth 1 to 3 p.m., and followed by Nancy C. with the Wednesday Traffic Jam from 3 to 6 p.m., at which point our terrific Wednesday night block of Latin music kicks in. So that's all coming up here on WMNF 88.5 FM. And first, at the top of the hour, we'll have WNPR News headlines, and then moving right into the conversation and those music programming. So I think that's it for today. Again, my thanks to Josh Hammer and to Alexa Sawyer at WNF.